I cannot tell you how delighted I am to see this audience in place this evening for this speaker. The arts are uniquely positioned to illuminate the past, to make it something that we can relate to, and we have this extraordinary opportunity to bring a Holocaust survivor to Ashtabula to speak to you. And in 10 years, this opportunity will have disappeared. There will be no more people who can speak to this from experience. So I'm very, very delighted to have Erika Gold here. She agreed to come out to speak to us, and she's done this for many groups. So I'm very happy to have her here to tell her story. I would like to thank the Maltz Museum for their cooperation. They are the organization that connected us to Erika Gold. And I would like to thank our actor and volunteer, Nicole Noskell, because she reached out and made the arrangements for this to happen because it's important to her. So, again, I feel like the arts are important in telling stories. Many of you are going to stay tonight to see the play, and you will see some history of the Holocaust there. But I am so, so pleased to present Erika Gold.
I like to start with Erika Gold from Budapest, Hungary, and I'm a child survivor of the Holocaust. I'm going to give you a little history of what was happening at the time when I was born in 1932. And Hitler came to power in January 1933. So I was just a baby, but that meant all my life was a little problematic with what was happening in Germany. Now, Hitler at that point was only interested in what was happening in Germany. Since I was in Hungary, and although Hungary were anti-Semitic and they had all kinds of laws for Jews, we were okay for a while because the government and the military was helping the Germans. So they left us alone. But there were signs. As I was a little girl, I heard my parents were listening to Radio Free Europe, which was in a shortwave radio, which was against the law to own and listen to. So I had to be very quiet, and I couldn't tell anybody. So I figured that wasn't a good thing. I heard Hitler on the radio shouting, and you didn't have to understand German to realize whatever he was saying, it wasn't good. So that's how I grew up, but as far as when I was a little girl, I could go wherever I wanted to go and do whatever I wanted to do, within reason, of course, but I was okay. I knew the schools had a quota system. Only 2% of the student body could be Jewish in a public school. So that's a very small number. In the universities, they will not take Jews in medical school, law school, or engineering. But otherwise, things were going pretty well as a little kid. So at the same time, excuse me, it's that kind of season. So anyway, at the same time in Germany, as soon as Hitler came to power, he had the Jews lose their citizenship. They could not work in the military or in the government. They were kicked out of universities, and everything was off limits. They couldn't even go to the park to sit on a bench. So it was horrible things, and because of all the propaganda that we heard on our radio, it was not the truth. It's because they were keeping certain things quiet. And that's why my parents were listening to the Radio Free Europe, and that came out of England, and that gave the real truth. Of course, not everything. So we knew, they knew that people were losing their citizenship, and some people were able to leave the country. At that point, Hitler did not want to kill the Jews. He just wanted them out of Germany. And if you had the desire or the will or somewhere to go, you could leave. And a lot of people did. Most people were very optimistic, and they felt nothing terrible will happen to them. They were in the military, and they couldn't imagine that something bad will happen. So unfortunately, they were wrong. So going on, they started burning books. They gathered books by Jews or about Jews or communists, and they took it to the middle of town and tried to burn them. Of course, not all the books were burned because we still have them. But then it was very important that people are Aryan-looking, meaning that blonde, blue-eyed, tall and handsome. And if Hitler would have looked in the mirror, he definitely would not have passed. In 1934, I'm sorry, there was a contest in Germany. They asked all the professional photographers to send in their most Aryan-looking baby picture. And they did. And one little girl won. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, because it's a copy of a copy, but afterwards, if you want to come and look at them, that's fine. This is the little girl that won, and unfortunately for them, she was Jewish. And that was actually, I think it was a PBS show quite a few years ago about her. They immigrated to the United States, and she was still alive. She might still be alive. So then things were getting worse, and in 1938, they annexed Austria, and they just marched in. The language is the same. Hitler actually came from Germany, so there was no problem doing that. And if you saw the Sound of Music, that is the story of the annexation of Austria. So after that was in March, I am so sorry. That was in March 1938. And then in November 9th and 10th, in 1938, was Kristallnacht. And that was when the Nazis went around and threw bricks and stones into Jewish-owned windows, stores, synagogues, and tried to burn them. And the fire department was just standing there to make sure that the other buildings don't catch on fire. So that was a very bad sign. A lot of people left at that point because they just couldn't imagine that this is going to get better very soon. So they were still able to get out if they had a place to go, but most borders were closed. By the way, there is a show, I don't know if anybody saw at least part of it, The United States and the Holocaust, where Ken Burns documents all the things that the United States did or did not do or knew or did not know. But I guess they knew a lot. And I think the last show is going to be on next Thursday. Anyway, so we did not know most of this as far as I'm concerned. But then when it was time for me to go to school, my parents signed me up to a Jewish day school, and that way I didn't have a problem of being bullied or being one of the 2%. Then in 1939, September 1st, Germany occupied Poland. And that's what actually started the Second World War. And at that point, they gathered the Jews. They either killed them outright, they put them in concentration camps, in work camps, and ghettos, and those ghettos were a certain size, and they always put in more and more people. People died just because of the diseases and not enough food and too crowded situations. Most of it, we did not know what was going on there. The only thing we knew was when Germany occupied Poland, my dad had a clerk in his store who was born in Poland, and she had to go back. I don't know why the Hungarians kicked her out, but that's what she had to do, and we never heard from her again. So I assume that we know what happened to her. After that, they kept on going one by one and occupied different countries. In all the countries they went to, they did the same thing. They gathered the Jews, they killed them outright, put them in concentration camps, and we know the rest. Because of the fact, as I mentioned, Hungary was on the side of the Germans, we did not get occupied at that point. But then when Russia, in 1943, Russia hit the Germans back and pushing them west, the Hungarian government realized that Hitler is not going to win the war, and because they are on their side, they tried to make peace with the Allies. And of course, Hitler found out right away and occupied Hungary. That was already, they thought the war was almost over. That was March 19th, 1944. And what they have done in Poland in 5 years, they accomplished in Hungary less than 2 months. And I was there, I was a witness, although I was young. But if you don't want to believe me, the Maltz Museum, you probably heard of the Maltz Museum, most people have been there, had an exhibit about Adolf Eichmann. He was one of the architects of the final solution, which of course now we know it was like the gas chambers and the crematorium. So by the time they occupied Hungary, the gas chambers were going 24 hours a day. And as I mentioned, they came in 19th of March. By the 1st of April, all the Jews, no matter what age, had to wear a yellow star to go out on the street. And it couldn't be just pinned on, it had to be sewn on. And everybody had to have it. Now, I don't know how, but we all had it in less than 2 weeks. So everybody had the yellow star, and people were very optimistic. And they said, so no big deal, so we'll wear a yellow star. But it was a big deal because all the laws after that came out was the people with the yellow star. couldn't do this or had to do that. So the first thing that happened, my grandfather, who lived about 2 hours from Budapest north, near the Czechoslovak border, sent a message that they have to move to somebody else's home because a Nazi officer needed his house. And that's all we knew. And he said that as long as they leave a roof over our heads, we'll be okay. So then we didn't hear from them, so I don't know if they had to move or they just stayed at that one place. At the same time, a law came out that non-Jewish people could not work for Jews. And we had a housekeeper at our apartment who wasn't Jewish. She had to leave and get her own apartment, which I don't know how much help that was for them. But anyway, my dad had a clerk in his store, and who was also not Jewish. He had to leave, but there it didn't make much difference because my dad had to close the store and report to a forced labor camp. And I have that document, so afterwards you can see it. And the only thing that's interesting about this, the emblem, I don't know if you can see it, it's Shell Oil, and they had a refinery near Budapest, so that's where my dad was working as forced laborer. I'm an only child, so my mother and I were alone in the apartment, and we had no idea what was going on in the rest of the country. Then in June, my grandfather sent another message that they're going to be taken out of town. And that's when we found out afterwards that the people were taken on cattle cars, not trains, cattle cars, 80 to 120 people in one cattle car, no food, just a bucket, empty bucket and one with water, and no air. They closed the doors, and that was that. And we had no idea what was happening to them until the war was over. All we knew that they were taken somewhere. As it turned out, all the Hungarians from all the smaller towns and villages, except for Budapest, they were taken straight to Auschwitz. And there was a Dr. Mengele who was in charge of separating the people. Anybody that he felt can work went on one side, and anybody that he felt was too old, too young, too sickly looking, or a woman with a child went on the other side, and unfortunately, that was the gas chamber. The people who were there afterwards said it took about 2 hours from the time the train stopped. The people got separated and gassed and cremated, and thousands of people were just gone in 2 hours. So that was really inhumane, as we know, but that's exactly what happened. No matter how many people will say that, no, they couldn't have done that, but that's exactly what happened. But we didn't know. So then, by July 1st, all the small towns and villages in Hungary were cleared out of Jews. And the only people were left were in Budapest, and that was just women, children, and old people, because all the working age men were already in some kind of a camp situation. Anyway, at that point, I was trying to tell you about the Maltz Museum had the exhibit about Adolf Eichmann. I never finished it. But there was a plaque that came with the exhibit that Eichmann received from the German government, complimenting him on being so efficient and transporting 400,000 Hungarian Jews to the camps in less than 2 months. I think it was like 56 days or something like that. So that was written by the German government. Anyway, so we're back to Budapest, and that by July 1st, when all the other people were already gone, they decided to put the people in Budapest kind of together. They designated a certain building where Jews could live, and other buildings were off limits. Now, we lived in a building that was off limits, but my mother had an aunt whose building was accepted, and we moved in with them. At that point, the Nazis wanted each room to be occupied by a whole family, not a person, a whole family. And to make it worse, the way they counted the rooms, if you had one bedroom, a dining room, a kitchen, and a bath, that was considered as 4 rooms. So 4 whole families had to occupy that space. So it was pretty crowded, but at least we were related, so it was a little easier than if we were total strangers. At that point, we could only go out on the street 2 hours a day. I think it was from 8 to 10 in the morning just to buy the most important fruits and vegetables, which in the summer it was plentiful in Hungary. And the Jews were not allowed to buy anything else, no flour or sugar or meat, no dairy products. I received 2 ounces of milk a week because I was under the age of 12. So that wasn't much nourishment, so my mother took me every day to the market, and we bought fresh fruits and vegetables, and that's what we lived on. But it was very boring, and you never knew what's going to happen tomorrow. Then October 15th, a new regime came in. The Arrow Cross took over, who were even meaner than the other Nazis, if that's possible, and they were going to get rid of the rest of us. So the first thing they did, they called all the women of working age to this big sporting arena. Unfortunately, my mother was part of that age group, so she had to go. And the Nazis had no idea how many people are going to show up. And because of the fact they had to register everybody, it took them a long time. I have a paper of that too. Let's see. Yeah, I have it. It happens to be about my uncle, but just to show, it's nice, neatly handwritten, and it has a lot of information. It has his number, his name, his birth date, where he was from, where he was at the time, and the transport, and the date. So it's a very detailed message. So some of the Nazis couldn't get done by the end of the day with all that work. And they said anybody who's not registered can go home, and they'll be called another time. So my mother was fortunate enough not to be registered. And she came home, but she said right away she has to think of something else to do because she's not going back there. At that point, she found out that there was a factory that was making soldier uniforms, which is very important for the war effort. And if we could get in there, they'll save us. So we got in there. We were very fortunate, and I have that paper too. The only thing that's important about this is the date. We received it November 14th, 1944. And so we never went outside. We worked during the day. And at night, we slept on the soldier uniforms on the floor. And that's how we existed there. While we were there, my dad sent a message that they're going to be taken away somewhere. At that point, my mother found out that there were neutral country diplomats in Budapest trying to save the remaining Jews of Europe because we were it. And they were giving out protective papers, and anybody who could get one felt that a little safer. She was able to get one for my dad. We knew that it was sent to him, but we did not know if it did any good. At this point, I want to mention that there were other diplomats in Europe doing the same thing. But they didn't talk about it because their own government was against it. But they did it anyway. So they just kept quiet, and people found out that they have done this after either they got very old or they passed away and the family found the paperwork. In 2005, there was an exhibit in the Cleveland Public Library called Visas for Life. And at that point, they already named over 100 of these diplomats trying to do the right thing. So there were a lot of people who tried to do the right thing, but not enough. When Israel made their first Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, they put up a garden right away, and they put up trees, and each tree had the name of one of these righteous Gentile diplomats. And then they ran out of space. Then they started putting up plaques of people who were doing the same thing, trying to save people who they didn't even know. And by the last time I was there, there were already over 27,000 names on those plaques, but it still, of course, was not enough. But I want you to know that some people did the right thing, and there were a lot of people who got killed for that privilege. So then we were still working in the factory, and on December 1st, as I mentioned, we got the paper November 14th. December 1st, the Nazis came and took us all away. Some of us were put on trucks. Other people were walking around Budapest all day long, not knowing where we're going to end up. It was a Friday afternoon when we arrived to this very busy marketplace. It was getting dusk, and there was a lot of people there buying their weekend items. And the Nazis said, we're going to stop here. Nobody should get out of line or get off the trucks. With that, the truck that my mother and I were on stopped. She jumped off. She winked at me. I jumped after her, and we walked away. Obviously, nobody saw us, or if they did, they didn't care. And one thing I never asked my mother, I didn't know I'm going to be talking about the Holocaust, so I don't know exactly if she figured this out ahead of time or it just happened that way. As I mentioned, we didn't need the yellow star until April 1st. By that time, the weather was kind of nicer, and we didn't need our winter coat, so our winter coat did not have a yellow star on it. But in December, we needed it. But since it didn't have the star on it, we put our raincoats on top of that, which did have the star, and that's how we were legal. But as we were walking in that very busy marketplace, we dropped the raincoats, and that way we were not as visible. By that time, we knew where our housekeeper lived with her daughter, who was my age. And we went there. Fortunately, we had a very good relationship with her. She was a wonderful person. And we asked her if we could stay for a couple of days till my mother figures out what else we can do or where we can go. And she let us in. She was a hero. Nobody knew that we were there. We never went outside. Her sister used to just drop in, and whenever she would come, we would have to hide either under the beds or in a little closet in the kitchen. And because she didn't trust her sister enough to let her know that we are there. So we were hiding just like Anne Frank. Fortunately, we didn't have to wait 2.5 years. But after January 15th, 1945, the Soviet Union Army came and liberated us, which made us very, very happy. But we didn't go out because we didn't know what was going on outside. And then a miracle happened 3 days later, the 18th of January. My dad came and found us, which was an absolute miracle that all three of us stayed alive. And that's when we found out that so-called chutzpahs, and I have a copy of that too. This was from the Swiss government. It got to him. The Nazi called him out of the train or cattle car and let him go. By that time, Budapest had a ghetto, and that's where my dad spent the remaining time of the war. But as it turned out, Budapest is made out of two cities, Buda and Pest. The Pest side is on the east side, and that's where the army was coming from. And when the Pest side, where we lived and the ghetto was liberated, the Germans blew up all the bridges on the Danube. So it took the Soviet Union another month to get over to the other side and keep on going and liberating other cities, countries, including the camps. And a lot of people who were in trains and walking. But anyway, the Soviet Union was going west, the Allies were going east, and that's how they liberated all the towns, countries, and the concentration camps. We did not know what was going on, but as far as we were concerned, on the 18th of January, we could leave, we could walk around the Pest side and do whatever we needed to do within reason. So we tried to go back to our old apartment, hoping that nobody occupied it. And as it turned out, it was the top floor of a big apartment building, and nobody wanted to live on the top floor of anything because all the air raids and bombings. So our apartment was exactly how we left it. Nobody was in there, nobody touched anything. Whatever we left there was there, and we could go back to take our apartment back. The only problem was we had no windows because all the windows were broken by the bombs. Fortunately, we forgot to close one window. It happened to be in the bathroom. So my parents pulled in one of those pull-out couches. They slept on that, and I slept in the bathtub. We have no food, no running water, no gas, no electricity, but we were free. And then when you're free, things get better, and things were happening. So then, whenever the people who were in the concentration camp was fortunate enough to, some of them who survived came back, is the time when we found out all the horrible, horrible things that was happening there, and all the people that we can't expect to come back. So it was a very sad and very disturbing. We didn't want to stay in Hungary even before my parents asked for a visa in 1936. And even after the Holocaust, our number was not even close. So in 1948, my dad found out that the Cuban government was selling visas. And if he buys us visas, we can go to Cuba, we're closer to the United States, and we're finally out of Europe. So that's what happened in 1948. In May, we went to Havana, Cuba, not knowing when we're going to get our American visa. But as I said, at least we were out of Hungary. Unfortunately, the Cuban government did not let people work. They charged for the visas, but you couldn't work, so it was a bad combination. So we didn't do much in Cuba. We were just waiting till our visa comes. So in 1950, finally, my mother got her visa because she was actually born in small town Galanta that used to be Hungary. Then it became Czechoslovakia. Then it was Hungary, back to Czechoslovakia. But anyway, she was on the Czechoslovak quota, which was a tiny bit bigger than the Hungarian. And because I was underage, I could go with either one. So my mother brought me over to Miami Beach, and my aunt and uncle from Cleveland came to get me and drove me to Cleveland. At that point, the only thing I was interested in is to learn English and get back to school, because by that time I had a lot of holes in my education. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Cleveland Heights High. I graduated in 1952, and if you have an American high school diploma, the world is yours. And so then I was able to go to Western Reserve University. In 1956, I became a medical technologist, and I got married the same year. We have 2 kids, 4 grandchildren, and 2 great-granddaughters. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer it. And if you want to see the papers, I'll put it on the stage, and you can look through it. Thank you.
Could I ask, what kind of a store did your father have?
Haberdashery. It was, yeah. There's a lot of buttons and lace and that kind of stuff.
Did your father make it to Cleveland?
Yes, we came together, yeah. I mean, my dad came a little later. I came, I think, in January, and my mother came in June, and my dad came in November, just before Thanksgiving. And that was the worst snowstorm.
Question?
Yes.
I don't have a question. I do want to say that the father of a daughter,
thank you very much for sharing the story with us.
Sure.
It's an honor to hear it. I think you're an extremely strong woman, not for only for what you went through, but for sharing it. So
Thank you.
Thank you for doing so. This is my
I'm glad that some people want to hear it. Actually, my uncle was very smart. He came in the 20s. Yes. So that was, he made a good choice. And by the way, they brought out a lot of people. By any chance, could you put on the light so I can see? Oh, that's getting better. Okay.
The question is, how was your dad able to afford to move you and your mom and yourself to Cuba?
I mean, they sold the store, and they had some money, so fortunately, it lasted us while we were in Cuba before we came to the United States, and he was able to get a job. Pardon me?
Before the war, was there a lot of anti-Semitism that was going on in Hungary?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's why they had the quota system in the schools and the universities. Yeah, but otherwise, it wasn't like Germany, where you couldn't go to the park or sit on a bench. I can't hear.
She's asking, why did the German people hate the Jewish people so much?
It's a 2,000-year question.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it's not just the Germans who have a beef with.
I don't know. I don't know what difference it makes to anybody how people worship God. I mean, we say it's one God and that's it. But yeah, some people don't like people living next to them that don't look like them. But it would be a boring universe.
I don't have another question, I probably do, but I won't ask. But I graduated from High as well.
Oh! What year?
Before you, 47. I had a question. How many of your family members did not survive?
Did or did not?
Did not.
Did not. Actually, I have a family tree that my mother's family, because they were the one, most of them did not live in Budapest, they lived in the outskirts. There were 45 people who were murdered in that 2 months period. 45 people in one family. Those were just close aunts, uncles, and cousins. And her father, and 2 brothers, and 2 nephews.
Were you interviewed for the documentary? I know that they did interviews with a lot of the Jewish Holocaust survivors because I've watched some of them. Were you one of the ones interviewed?
By the Shaw Foundation by Spielberg's, yes. The Council of Jewish Women, yes. The Maltz Museum has a video, and there are some others floating around. I just met somebody, a college kid, I think in UCLA, and he watched my story.
Is there anyone else? Yes.
First off, I have to say thank you so much for being here. As an educator, what is your advice to those of us to teach future generations to ensure that your story continues to be told and this never happens again? How can we help you tell your story?
First of all, everybody has to vote. Everybody has to know who they're voting for. And you have to differentiate between real news and news that is made up, which is not easy. I realize that, but that's what it has to be. And otherwise, people just go back and they forget their history and repeat it, unfortunately.
Sir?
I have a two-part question. First of all, how religious was your family prior to the war, and how did the war experience affect your relationship with your religion?
My mother's family was very religious. Actually, my dad's mother was very religious. My dad's father wasn't so much. And we were kind of in between. But I'm still the same as I was before. I went to a Jewish day school, both in elementary school and gymnasium. And I belong to a synagogue. I'm on the board. And I'm very interested in not just the Jewish temples and synagogues, but I understand even churches have less people because people are not interested in religion or organized religion or whatever. But the churches are empty, the synagogues are empty, which is unfortunate.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd just like to say, what you talked about today brought back a lot of history of my grandmother and how she came over and from Latvia. And I just want to say Shana Tova.
I couldn't hear.
Hey,
Shana Tova. Yes.
Oh, Shana Tova, the you too.
anyone else? I think we've reached the end of our questions.
Thank you.